On behalf of the Preservation Trust of Christ Church and of Christ Church itself, let me welcome you here. My name is Neil Ronk, and I am the senior guide / historian of the church. I've been here now almost 20 years on the staff of this institution, and one of the nicest things I can say about what we do here is that we represent a continuity in our history. We see, on average, around 250,000 people a year, a lot of them school children. And one of the most interesting things about this experience, especially if you were trained academically as a historian, as I was, is to talk to 8th graders, or more importantly, 5th graders. Then you get an idea of what historic preservation is at the ground level. Because your question often revolves around, is this place real? And by the way, try to answer that question. Is it real? Or is it just the way it always looked? Questions like that. The way I look at it here is I was given a framework to talk about all the generations who have attended this church and the community it impacted, whether they attended it or not. The fun of my job here is I tell people nobody in here dresses in a colonial set of clothes because we're not recreating the past. We're continuing to use it. One of the most common questions I'll get on any given day is, when's the last time somebody really used this as a church? And I'm able to say there's never been a last time. A most recent time, yes, but not a last time. The fun of this place to me is I can walk in here, and 20 years ago, this neighborhood, as anyone who's lived in this area for any length of time can tell you, was underutilized. Where there now is a restaurant, there was an adult bookstore. And the interesting thing to me was this institution, by not leaving, and there were plenty of times in our history where there was an option and a movement in the history of this parish to say, let's move to a fashionable area. Let's move to an area where there's fertile ground. We didn't. We fought off the temptation. The irony is some of those fertile grounds are now not particularly fertile. What was fertile ground for us 100 years ago when this was deemed barren, well, those areas now, I suspect we wouldn't want to move to. But that's precisely what a church ought to be doing. And by the way, it's precisely what history ought to be doing. The fun of my job, and I wouldn't trade what I do for anything in the world, which is, I think, one of the things that preservationists and historians know, it's an open secret to us and a closed secret to the rest of the world, is how much fun this is. And I look at preservation in this building, or I look at this building itself, not as a structure, but as an institution. And by this institution staying in this neighborhood, on this site, for 316 years, we are not talking about the signers of the Declaration, although we can. What we're talking about is the longevity of communities, the permanence of change. What our previous speaker mentioned, we try to do on a daily basis, and we try to make that point to kids who are yet to think in historical terms. And one of the nicest things you can do to a 5th grader, and by the way, most of us, unless we're parents, we don't talk to 5th graders and 8th graders. That's all I do every day. Try to convince them that the love of history or the preservation of structures is meaningful. And you'll find a different way of thinking of your own career. The fun of this is to be able to say to kids who don't look a thing like George Washington, that their world resonates in the contemporary, that they're not two different worlds, that they resonate with each other. And that's what we try to do with our preservation here. That's what we try to do with our history here. And I suspect without fully realizing it, it's what you do every day. But welcome to Christ Church. And if there's anything we can ever answer as a question, we will love to do it. But thank you for being with us today.
It's always fun for me, and I've had the great pleasure of occasionally driving Nick into Philadelphia and back out again. And inevitably, it's not about Nick, it's about all the other people that he's worked with throughout the history of his stay in Philadelphia. Nick's going to talk to us today. He's also going to ask Charlie Tonetti, whom he just has the highest esteem for, who's worked with Nick on several projects. Bruce Gill will be here to talk with him. But Nick has a very special project here to tell us about related to Christ Church.
Well, good morning. What we're going to do here this morning is something I've never done before, and I don't think the other participants have done it either. It's going to be kind of a tag team presentation, and we have on hand, I don't know, is Bruce here? Where is he? Oh, there he is. All right, okay. Bruce Gill and I have worked together since 1980-81 here at Christ Church. Bruce is a member of the vestry. He's the rector's verger. He is well steeped in the knowledge of materials, and we have been as far down as we could go and as far up as we can go in this building many, many times. I can no longer do it, but he still does it. We also then have Charles Tonetti here from the National Park Service. Charlie is the Chief Historical Architect for the Independence Park and is currently the individual in charge of the extensive work being done on Independence Hall Tower. Now, when Charlie asked me to talk about the two towers, both of which I'd worked on at different times, you know, it really didn't congeal as to how this might be done. And what I have never done, but I hope to in some way do today, yes? Okay. That was Mr. Farrell from Natchitoches. Okay, can you hear me better now? All right, my apologies. Having worked on both these towers, and became familiar with them individually but not comparatively, I said, well, why not take this program and try and draw a comparison between the two towers, the tower that Robert Smith did here in the 1750s, and William Strickland did in the 1820s up at Independence. And they are two totally different towers, and I hope to convey some of that today. And so, you know, hope you folks will enjoy what you're going to see, because you're going to see a lot of things most people have never seen before. All right, so Bruce, could you come up here and give us a lift?
Good morning. What I'd like to do is just give you a quick overview of the construction history of this place, concluding with the tower, and then Nick will take over and talk about the structure of the building and what we did in it in the 1980s. First, this is the Strickland painting of Christ Church about 1811, and it's backwards. It should be turned around the other way. The building was erected in the middle of the 18th century. This was the first Church of England parish in the colony of Pennsylvania, in this hotbed of Quakerism. When the building was started and the parish was founded in the 1690s, this was considered the hot church party. King Charles II had demanded of William Penn that if several Anglicans wanted a Church of England parish, that they were to not be denied one, nor would they be molested. Indeed, they began building a building. The building that we're in today is at least the second and perhaps the third building on the site. The building that we're in very quickly started the west end from the two columns in back to the west wall. Was the first campaign from about 1727 until 1734. Then the eastern portion from the columns east to the great Palladian window by 1740 or 41, and the fitting out of the interior by 1744. So it's very much as you see it today. A steeple had been planned as early as 1727, and the foundations were laid. But nothing happened until the 1750s. And finally, in 1751-52, the great brick tower was erected. Whether they used those 1727 foundations, we're not quite sure. We do know that during some recent work within the last 10 years, with the installation of a 9-inch water main for our sprinkler system, went in to the cellar at floor level about 9 feet below present ground level behind the steeple. It comes right in through the foundation, which is 68 inches thick, and it's a stepped out foundation. We know that there's another step just below that water pipe, and that there's 24 inches further down to another step. So we're well past 10 feet, 12 feet from the ground surface with the massive foundations. Robert Smith was then asked to come along and add the great wooden spire that Nick's going to talk about in just a few minutes. Work began in the spring of 1753, and he was paid his last payment by December, so in 1754. So the work went very, very quickly. That's the overview of the church, and I'll now turn it back to Nick.
Years ago, one of my mentors, Charles Peterson, said that when you address a group, you have to grab their attention from the very beginning. And, you know, there are different ways of doing it. You can intimidate the group, you can do anything you want. But I thought it'd be appropriate that if we had a tower burning, that would be a good way to start this talk. So I'll ask Bruce to take over on the history of this.
Well, here you see the building on May 28th in 1908. The building was struck by lightning. There had been a lightning arrestor on the building since the 1770s or 80s, but the building was struck by lightning during a thunderstorm. It caught fire, and the firemen had a great deal of trouble getting up and down inside the steeple, and it was mostly the rainstorm that extinguished the fire. That did lead to, as the steeple was rebuilt, and Nick will again mention that work, the steeple was rebuilt by a member of the parish. The architect was a member of the parish, a man named Thomas Seeds, and the work was completed within 6 months, so they got right on it and went ahead. However, not before the city inspectors, such as they were, came in and condemned the building and said that it had to be torn down. That's the last vestry minute we have that describes what happened until they're terribly excited that the work is now accomplished. So we really don't know what went on between the time the city told the parish to tear the remnants of the steeple down and when it was finished, except that we have the work.
The reconstruction was from the top of the weather vane down to the top of the cupola at that level there. And the one thing I like about this photograph is the way this guy is grandstanding here. You know, he'd be fired today. But anyways, let's continue. Now, the reason for this is just to have you think about the comparative geometry of how the octagonal cross-section church tower was superimposed over a square base. And this involved a lot of intricate carpentry, structural carpentry, which evolved from the very complex British medieval system of joints and so on, highly redundant. And, you know, it was an eye-opener to myself when I first went up there, and I tussled with it for several years, hoping that we were doing the right thing. But anyway, so let's move along. Oh, incidentally, one of the things that was unique about what was done with this scaffolding is that it could not bear on the roof here. The tower is immediately beyond the end of the church, but we couldn't bring the scaffolding down on the roof, and so the scaffolder rather ingeniously took the louvered openings that were there, removed the louvers, and cantilevered steel beams through the louvers, picked up the scaffolding, going to the top, and dropped it down to the top of the roof. There was a lot of ingenuity involved. Bruce?
Here we are at the very top of that scaffold, and right here, this is the spindle on which the ornaments are placed, and we're about to put back the gray board. We're trying to figure out how we're doing it. The cap of the steeple has been completely rebuilt, and you'll see another photograph of that in just a moment.
Now, this is the engineer of record doing a final inspection of the installation. Please note what is known as the white knuckle stance. You know, when you're up there 230 feet on a windy day, you know, the sense of self-preservation predominates.
This is in the process of the work. This is a solid lead cap that weighs hundreds of pounds that replaced one that was of turned wood and burned in the fire. The wrought iron spindle, the cap, and the ornaments fell off the steeple in that fire in 1908 and came crashing to the ground. The spindle and ornaments were repaired and put back, but the turned wooden cap was replaced by this piece in solid lead, which was slid over the great long spindle. And it's a little difficult to see, but as we began to cut away the sheet metal covered wooden spire cap, we realized that all the pieces were falling out all over the place because this lead cap was simply sliding down the pole. We had to do something in a hurry. So this is called invention. I ran down to the parking lot and grabbed the snow change. This is from my Volvo. So it's a 14-inch wheel, SR 7415, I think. Snow chain, ran back up, and it's exactly the size of the cap, which we then cut in half and used as a model for a fiberglass cap to replace it.
When they removed the cap, we then saw the existence of a wrought iron bracket at the very top of the wood framing of the spire, through which the weather vane spindle projected, and it was entirely a handmade piece. It was really quite nice, and I had wanted to save it. So we had it removed, we took it down, we took it to a facility that sandblasted and cleaned it, and then I had it hot dip galvanized, grade error. It delaminated and came apart and had to be replaced. I suspect it's somebody's coffee table now. I don't really know.
We don't know what happened to it. It disappeared.
But I'll bet it is somewhere. So anyways, it became necessary to produce a new one. So which we did is we made one out of steel. And you'll note here, you probably have noted that the tops of the 8 octagonal corner pieces of the spire, the upper ends had weathered and had some decay, but it was mostly splitting. It really was not fungal. And so we reduced that. We cut it down that much, built it up with layers of Honduran mahogany, sheathed it with marine plywood, and re-extended it down with hold downs down into the body of the spire, so that we really reinforced this so that it was a good sound upper thing, which was subjected to enormous wind forces and northeasters and so on. Now, as a part of this process also with Bruce, we were able to bring in a metallurgist, a fellow by the name of Jerry Liss, who had been chief of testing of the Franklin Institute laboratories when they were operational. And Jerry came up and he did ultrasound scans of the weather vane spindle and described to us from the scans that the spindle had been made of 1/4-inch strips of wrought iron, heated, and then hammered, blacksmithed together into a solid piece. And as Bruce tells me, when they had the fire in '08, this spindle came down, got bent, they straightened it out and put it back up, and it's still there. But anyways, we try not to throw anything away down here. Bruce.
Okay, this is after, pardon me, after the new base was created, the spire cap was rebuilt using Honduran mahogany, and we got great chunks of mahogany because a friend of mine had tried to open a bar, and he bought a huge block of mahogany, and then it didn't work out, and we got the mahogany as a contribution. So we were able to copy those pieces that fell out from underneath the spire cap, which would be up here, and crush down all of these ribs, one of which was signed by a man named Frank Rush, who was the chief carpenter during the reconstruction after the fire in 1908. And carpenter Bob Roman from J.S. Cornell Company recreated this spire cap out of the mahogany and then sheathed it in mahogany planks.
This is an interior view at the very top of the spire, looking at the very end, and you see the bracket that we provided, the spindle, and some miscellaneous bracing. But you know, the interesting thing about that is as you climb the spire, it has an internal ladder, and the ladder gets narrower and narrower and narrower. And when you get to the top, the only way you can go from one rung to the other is like tiptoe like this, and then when you're up there, you can't really hardly move around. It's quite an experience.
Remember all this. You'll see in other photographs. So just remember all of this. We'll mention it again. Here it is. Climbing amidst the spindle and the braces and the brackets and the sprinkler system, the water curtain for the exterior of the steeple, you finally get up, and looking out north, east, south, and west are little windows about 6 to 8 inches square. And here we're looking out through one of those little windows, ventilators at the top, and we're looking east across New Jersey.
Now what we have here, and I wish the contrast was a little greater, but a photographer had come in, was he a Park Service photographer? Had come in and taken some 4x5 black and white negatives of the interior views of the upper part of the steeple. And what you begin to see here is this very complex arrangement of members that Robert Smith had contrived, making those changes in the size of the cupola, how do you say, the spire, the cupola base, and so on. And it is, I never experienced another one in Philadelphia like it, or anywhere near here, but let me continue. Now here are some other views looking from that same position slightly downward, and you are seeing this base where there's a series of 8 of these brackets that make the transition, and this is before we installed our new remedial framing. Again, the same thing, more of the same, and the you know, when you stop to think about it, this was all done without skill saws. This was guys with hand saws and adzes and et cetera and so on. It was quite an accomplishment. This is the underside of the cupola floor. Again, simply showing the care with which the joints were made. They used these very long pins and mortise and tenons and so on. It's the original stuff. And there it is up there. It's a pity the public can't go up there and make a great trip. I'll bet you could charge $10 a trip, you know.
Oh, we got more than that this week.
All right. Now, unfortunately, this drawing's on its side. It should have been reversed 90 degrees. What we have, this is really the cupola. And the views that you were looking at were in this area here. And you begin to see that it was a maze of wood framing, quite a maze. Now, as you'll see some other photographs, one of the real differences between this tower and Independence is that the tradition of British carpentry and tower building at the time was to develop its structure and then to sheathe it with the finished materials right in contact with the framing. In other words, here you have these framing members octagonal, but the sheathing applied directly to it. And what that really does is obscures the contact face so that when you have water driven through the joints, cracks, etc., and so on, you have then that possibility of fungal decay. And it's all blind, you can't see it. And the only time you see it is when you have a failure of an element or so. So, the decision was, what can we do to stabilize the tower when circumstances like that prevail? And, you know, after a lot of head scratching, we said, all right, let's do something. Let's install a steel tower, an armature within this complex arrangement, and take it up to the level of the transition for the cupola. Down here, this is the belfry here. Down here are the bells. And this is the top of the masonry tower. I think it's 100 feet up to that point. And we brought and installed a grillage of steel in this area with corner grillage beams so that we could not only support this, but we could brace it against wind, and we could also take the bells and lift them, rig them out. It was a multi-purpose kind of solution. Now, we will have a photograph of this, and in a moment Bruce can describe that. But the, you know, it became very, very, how would you say, I became very cognizant of the fact that this was a totally different thing than what we had worked on at Independence. Now this happens to be the plan of the framing above the bells at the top of the belfry, and what we have are corner grillages. Only one is drawn, the others are diagrammatic, and we raised 8 columns from these points, 8 columns that went up and did not cut one piece of the original framing. It was an intervention which, you know, quote, as the Secretary of Interior standards say, you know, it can be removed without, you know, affecting what it had protected. And that is indeed the case, and we have always tried to do that as an office practice. Again, this is at the transition level, below the cupola. This is above that. I'll tell you, there was a lot of field measuring to do this. Somebody didn't hand us a set of drawings. As a matter of fact, the story is, when this was being done around 84, 85, my son had just graduated from Villanova and he didn't get a job. And so I said, come on into the office, we'll do something. And so he had graduated in mechanical engineering and he was quite good at drafting. And so we put him up in the tower with a card table and a lamp and a roll of paper and told him to start drawing and measuring. Well, he was up there for a couple of weeks and he did most of these drawings are his with some later enhancements. And so one day I was here and they had something to be inspected. up at the top of the spire. And there's a little trap door that goes out the side of the tower that went right onto the scaffolding. And so I crawled out and I said to my son, "Come on along." And, I walked over the corner stairway that went up to into the top. I noticed gingerly holding the handrails of the scaffolding. And this is the first time he'd been out there. In fact, he'd never been out at that elevation before in his life. And I said to him, "You're not very comfortable, are you?" And he says, "No, I'm not." I said, "Well, get back in there." So he went in, and you know what he what he does? He designs and flies in helicopters now. So, I mean, maybe this is what got him on his way. I don't know. Well, this is just a rendered plan of that transition level, showing you the complexity of what Smith had done. And, how they did all this, I'll never know. But, I'll tell you an interesting story about the tower and the difference in point of view of preservation as it is practiced here, excuse me, sir, and in Great Britain. In 1985, I had been invited to go to a conference at the University of Bath. And actually, I went as a substitute for Lee Nelson, who had had abdominal surgery. And I went over and talked about the Fairmont Waterworks up along the river. And the co-chair of the whole thing was Sir Bernard Fielden, who had done all the great work at York Minster, underpinning, et cetera, et cetera. And so at the end of the day, they had a banquet, and I was sitting with Sir Bernard, whom I had met through Charlie Peterson. Actually, I'd taken him up into the tower a few years before. And so he said, "What are you going to do with the rest of your time over here?" And I said, "Well, I want to go see York Minster." We were at Bath at the time. I want to go to York, and then I want to go up to Edinburgh and find Dalkeith, find out where Robert Smith came from, et cetera, and so on. But I really want to see some British wooden steeples and towers. He said, "We don't have any." And I said, "How's that?" He said, "The Beatles or the Hurricanes got them, so we don't have any. They rebuilt some in brick, but we don't have any to show you like you have," because he had been here, so he knew what we had here. So, "Why are you interested in the towers?" I explained to him that we were trying to make these decisions right at that very time at Christ Church. And he said, "Nicholas, let me advise you. When you go back to Philadelphia, ask to speak before the assembled congregation and vestry of the church, and recommend to them that they go to that corner lot right out there, put up a huge tent and a workshop, disassemble the tower piece by piece, examine it, repair it, rebuild it, replace it, and reassemble it." And I said, "Sir Bernard, that's going to take more than 2 years." He smiled and he says, "It should." So, of course, that met with a dull thud here. Here everything is fast-tracked. Everything is fast-tracked. Don't get in the road, it's fast-tracked. Or if it's not fast-tracked, it's value-engineered by people who don't know a darn thing about what they're valuing. Anyways, all right, let's continue. Well, this was just, it's kind of a diagram. You can't see very much. But what we did find is we had two columns and a cupola that faced in this orientation that took the brunt of the northeasters. And so we had a lot of decay, and what we did is rather than take the columns out, we pieced disassembled them in place with Dutchmen, backed them up with steel. Did we skip that, the rotten columns?
No, I think it's later.
Okay, all right. Here we have a grillage, our new grillage, and or let's say a corner grillage over there. And then we have this new steel grillage up above here, and we tie down the tower into the corners of the masonry mass. Now, Bruce, would you explain what these two guys are?
Yeah, this is Nick's new base for the new steel grillage. And here are two earlier tie downs. This one with the wrought iron T comes down to two great blocks in the wall, and there were 4 of those that tied down the wooden spire onto the masonry. The ones in the corners we think are earlier. As I said, this whole building project for this building was done over a period of years and in a series of campaigns. And the masonry, a rubble masonry tower with the brick face was built first and then we think capped. And these are fakes. They do nothing today. And we think that they may have been the tie downs for perhaps a hip roof until the money could be raised for Robert Smith or whoever, turned out to be Robert Smith, to build the wooden spire on top of the masonry tower.
What we have here are one of the columns. You can see the really destructive decay of the column. They are oak. And again, you know, this issue that we tussled with is if we had to really replace them, we would almost have to disassemble the whole thing and come down. So rather than doing that, we backed them up with steel and rebuilt them. Once the steel was installed, then these were cut out and rebuilt in place with heavy planking, screwed together, bolted together. And it's kind of a jerry-built solution, but I think that it's been through some serious storms. And I want to tell you, every time there was a major storm, I turn on KYW and listen to see if there's any news about old city.
This is also right at the top of the lantern or the arches that you see in the wooden spire. And right here is the interface between the 18th century work and Robert Smith's 18th century timber framing and the rebuilding after the fire in 1908. And these steel clip angles, and then there's an iron grid at the base of the spire that ties the two together.
There was, down in the tower itself, we did come across a column that was pretty badly decayed, and so we had to cut it out. This is a temporary bracing. We had already installed the steel below, so we were able to brace down onto that steel work and take advantage of it. That permitted us to do the shoring of the tower above. And this is showing the stuff being installed. Bruce? You saw the two tie downs, 18th century tie downs in the earlier slide. And here we're in the upper octagon section, just below the cupola or lantern. And these are Nick's tie downs. There are 8 columns, and there are 2 of these tie downs per column that tie down that upper octagon, goes through into the lower octagon, and then grabs the structural steel below. So it's not only holding the building up, would there be a failure, but it's also tying it down onto the masonry. In addition to the structural work inside, we had the opportunity, since we had the scaffolding up, to do a proper paint job and do some conservation on decorative elements on the steeple. This is one of the consoles with the faces that were carved by
Samuel Harding, a Philadelphia carver named Samuel Harding. In 1754, he charged 12 pounds for 8 of these faces and consoles, which stare out north, east, south, and west. And it's a friend of mine, Peter Clausewitz, who came in, and we cleaned between 1/4 and 3/8 of an inch of paint from all of the consoles. This is one block. There'll be a better photograph in just a minute. One block that runs up. The only separate piece is just the face, which is nailed on and then carved. You can barely see the great check here. Once Peter had them cleaned, I was able to cut this out and install a Dutchman and recarve the missing parts. And here Nick is photographed as the scaffolding's coming down. This is one of the completed consoles. It's a single block of wood. They're a little longer than 4 feet from here to this upper Taurus molding. As I said, the face is the only added block to the entire piece. And from the side, and here you can just see the line where the face has been attached to the block. We recarved several of these, and then we also cast some in Velstone, something called Velstone, which is what dentists use. We froze it, we fried it, we put it in a microwave, and it seemed to survive, so we went ahead and used them. As painters came along over the years, they would scrape away, and in several cases, only the little rosehead nail was left. So we pulled the rosehead nail, applied the recarved rosettes or the cast rosettes using the same nails. We also, in addition to just the steeple work, did other work on the buildings. We worked on the Wheeler gates out front, which were blacksmith Samuel Wheeler had worked on this building beginning in 1771, when Robert Smith was called back. This is within 20 years, and had to make some major improvements to his framing and to the steeple because of water leakage. Wheeler did all of the ironwork for that work. He constructed the wonderful gates that face on 2nd Street. Pardon me, we went around and did other things in the building as well. In fact, the clear glass windows were part of the project. There had been stained glass installed in the early 20th century. They were removed to be cleaned and repaired, and there was so much light and air that came in the building, a decision was made not to put them back. And I hope that you'll take the opportunity to walk across the street to use the men's or ladies' room, if nothing else, and take a look at one of the great stained glass windows that's been put in our newly renovated neighborhood house right across the way. One of the other things that we did is this great plaque of George II hangs just above this Palladian window, faces out on 2nd Street. We took it down. It also was covered with up to 3/8 of an inch of paint. We took it down, and I had to recarve some pieces that were missing, but it had been cleaned, and we had a paint analysis done as part of this project on the building. And Frank Welsh told us that this was originally painted in red iron oxide. We found some red iron oxide and repainted it, and just as we were about to put it back on the building, the rector said, "You can't see it, it's the same color as the brick." So it's now been painted ivory.
Again, you see here this octagonal-shaped tower sheathed in contact with the framing, and it was configured by Robert Smith in a very, very complex geometric way. And when we compare it to Strickland's tower, it's the difference of night and day, and I hope I can convey the difference to you. Now here is a cross-section of Independence Tower that was prepared in our office to illustrate the different phases of construction by the coloration here. What we have here is the dark brown lower portion are the remnants of the original 1750s framing for the lower tower. When the tower came off, this remained and it still exists in the upper part of the masonry portion. It supports the clock room and different things. Then Strickland came in and installed 4 heavy cast iron brackets in the corners of the brick tower, and then erected 4 columns which, converged towards the top. And what he did was to take the wood finish, and rather applying it directly to the structural members, the columns, he spaced it outboard. It was almost like a wedding cake. You had this inner construction, and then you had this wrapping around of the boxes. Now, my assumption is, I've never read anything on this, nor do I know whether it exists. My assumption was that he did this because he realized, first of all, let me say, Strickland was a pretty ingenious fellow. He wasn't as technically advanced in his education as Latrobe. He had worked for Latrobe, and I think he absorbed a lot from Latrobe. But Strickland was highly intuitive. This is my take on the man and his work. What he did is he put the enclosure of architectural finishes so that they could be, how would you say, replaceable, sacrificial, as they wore out from the, the effects of weather, that the water would be kept away from the principal framing, which were the 4 major columns. Now, whereas Robert Smith here used this complex geometry to stiffen this tower against torsion and so on, Strickland simply installed floors at different levels, and the floors acted as diaphragms from the corner columns, and so that provided the rigidity against torsion. It's the way you build a house. Nothing mysterious about it. So later, and the one thing that Strickland did is he made use of knee braces, little crooks cut out of the branches of oak trees. And, for instance, they make a lot of use of the oak from the south, that does this. And they, apparently on the last storm, a lot of these trees went down, and the branches were all bought by Mystic Seaport because they could use them in a long-term reproduction or the reinforcement of the ships up in Mystic. But in 1876, a centennial, they were going to erect a bell which weighed 13,000 pounds, which is still up there. They then braced the tower with the V bracing and the X bracing to stiffen it, which all yet exists there. Now, you can see that the whole approach between these two tower makers was different, but yet they produced towers which have existed for, this is over 200 years here, and Independence Hall is, I guess it's darn near that close too. So, you know, we've been very fortunate in the city. Actually, this tower, Christchurch Tower, which was the tallest thing in the area, was frequently used by the navigators coming up the Delaware Bay to sight in on where Philadelphia was upstream. And they predominated the skyline until City Hall Tower came in the late 1800s.